In November 1981, the black water off Catalina Island swallowed one of the most beloved actresses in Hollywood history. The official verdict came within 2 weeks. Accident. A tragic slip in the dark. A woman who had too much to drink, who tried to tend to a dinghy, and who fell into the sea alone. The world was handed that story, and for 4 decades, most of the world accepted it. But the case never truly closed, not in the minds of investigators who kept returning to the evidence, not in the accounts of witnesses who had heard things across the water that night, and not in the gap between what the physical evidence actually showed and what the official report said it meant. Now, in 2025, that same case is being viewed through an entirely different kind of lens. Not the naked eye of a 1981 coroner, not the 2-week investigation of a department that ruled it an accident before anyone had fully asked the hard questions, but through AI-driven forensic analysis, 3D crime scene reconstruction, audio pattern mapping, digital timeline modeling, and bruise analysis technology that simply did not exist when Natalie Wood died. And what those tools suggest about the night of November 28, 1981, does not match the clean, tidy story the world was told. Before anything else, the legal facts need to be stated clearly. Robert Wagner, Natalie Wood's husband, was named a person of interest by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department in February 2018. He has never been charged with any crime. He's never been convicted of anything. But investigators publicly stated that his account of events that night did not match the witness testimony they had gathered, and that, in their view, he had not told the full story. The death certificate itself was amended in 2012, changing the cause of death from accidental drowning to the far more troubling phrase, drowning and other undetermined factors. That is the legal status of this case today. Unsolved, officially undetermined. And it is precisely into that gap, into that word undetermined, that modern forensic technology is now shining a light that 1981 could never have produced. To understand why the official story was accepted so quickly, you need to understand who Natalie Wood was and what her death meant to the people who would have had to challenge it. She was not simply famous. She was the face on every magazine cover, the dark-eyed girl America had watched grow up on screen since she was 4 years old. Born in San Francisco in 1938 as Natalia Zakharenko, the daughter of Russian immigrants, she was pushed in front of cameras by a fiercely ambitious mother who had decided her daughter's life would belong to the screen before the girl could tie her own shoes. The system that raised her was total. First, her mother held the strings. Then the studios. She moved from one form of managed control to another without ever experiencing a life that fully belonged to her. And yet what she built out of all that pressure was genuinely remarkable. 3 Academy Award nominations. Rebel Without a Cause, West Side Story, Splendour in the Grass. She was by 1981 an actress who had transformed the raw pain of a managed childhood into work of real emotional power. And she was still working, still ambitious, still in the middle of a career she had fought for decades to make her own. She was 43 years old. She had everything to live for. And she was terrified, with a fear that those close to her described as deep and paralyzing of dark water, cold water, open water at night. Whatever its origin, the fear never left her. Those who knew her well said it could seize her without warning. She organized parts of her life around avoiding exactly that kind of situation. And yet, the last night of her life placed her precisely there on a boat, on open water, in the cold, dark Pacific, in rough weather, surrounded by people she trusted. The people on board that night were Wagner, Natalie, actor Christopher Walken, who was her co-star on a science fiction film she was then shooting, and Dennis Davern, the yacht's captain. The boat was the Splendour. They had sailed to Catalina Island for a Thanksgiving weekend. From the beginning of that trip, by multiple accounts that would emerge over the following decades, the atmosphere was heavily soaked in alcohol. Tensions rose. Conversations turned sharp. There was, according to Dennis Davern, a moment when Wagner smashed a wine bottle in anger during a confrontation. The mood curdled. And sometime in the hours after midnight, Natalie Wood went into the water. That fact is not disputed. What happened in the minutes before it, and the hours immediately after it, is where the entire case lives. Detective Ralph Hernandez of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department stated publicly that the autopsy report indicated a number of bruises that appeared to be fresh on Wood's body, and that she looked like the victim of an assault. Lieutenant John Carina, leading the reinvestigation, told CBS that Wagner's version of events did not match the accounts of other witnesses, that he had constantly changed his story a little, and that his version of events simply did not add up. Investigators stated plainly, "We have not been able to prove this was a homicide, and we have not been able to prove this was an accident either. The ultimate problem is, we do not know how she ended up in the water. That is the starting point." Now consider what modern technology would do with that starting point today. The first and most important tool to understand is AI-assisted bruise analysis. In 1981, when Natalie Wood's body was examined, the coroner found more than 24 bruises scattered across her arms, legs, and face. The original interpretation was that these were consistent with a fall and with the desperate flailing of a drowning victim trying to grab onto something in the dark. That reading was reasonable, given the tools available, but the tools available in 1981 were a trained human eye, a physical examination, and the medical judgment of a professional working under time pressure on a case that had already been framed as an accident. What those tools could not do was measure the direction of impact that caused each bruise, estimate the precise timing of each one relative to when she entered the water, or differentiate between bruises caused by self-inflicted impact during a fall and bruises caused by external force from another person. A 2026 study published in Forensic Science, Medicine, and Pathology describes AI-assisted forensic 3D avatar systems that use AI-driven injury detection and digital twin visualization to map bruises on the human body with anatomically precise localization, providing speed and standardization far beyond what traditional examination allows. The study identifies advantages, including the ability to differentiate injury patterns with a level of objectivity and detail that supports admissibility in forensic medicine. This technology now exists. It was not available in 1981, and what it does is directly relevant to the central unresolved question in the Wood case, which is whether the bruise pattern on her body is consistent with a fall and a drowning struggle, or consistent with physical contact from another person before she entered the water. Research published in 2025 on optimizing the detection and characterization of bruises using multispectral imaging represents exactly the kind of tool this case needed, capable of analyzing bruise characteristics with a precision far beyond what a visual examination alone can achieve. If that technology were applied to the photographic and physical evidence from the 1981 examination, the bruise pattern could be analyzed in ways that were literally impossible at the time. The direction of impact, the depth distribution, whether the marks on her forearm, which investigators noted were non-mechanical and possibly caused by another person, matched the physics of a grip or a push, rather than a fall against a hard surface. These are answerable questions now. They were not answerable then. The second major technology is 3D crime scene reconstruction. In 1981, the yacht Splendour was examined. Notes were taken, photographs were made, and then the physical space of the crime, the layout of the deck, the position of the swim step, the exact geometry of the night was essentially fixed in two-dimensional documentation that could not be interacted with, tested against physics, or analyzed dynamically. Today, that approach has been replaced by something fundamentally different. Modern AI and 3D scanning technologies now enable immersive crime scene reconstructions that facilitate the collection and visualization of detailed spatial data, allowing for a more comprehensive analysis of the crime scene and the evidence present, with AI-driven automation capable of detecting evidence including thermal imprints and conducting multimodal integration of data sources. A comprehensive forensic tool published in Algorithms in 2025 describes an integrated system using advanced 3D reconstruction and semantic and dynamic analyses, including a dynamic analysis module that supports trajectory calculations for crime scene investigations, using machine learning to enhance accuracy of scene analysis. Applied to this case, that capability means something specific and significant. The Splendour's layout is documented. The exact dimensions of the swim step, the platform at the back of the yacht from which Wood allegedly slipped, are in the record. The sea conditions off Catalina Island on the night of November 28, 1981, including wind speed and wave pattern, exist in meteorological records. Natalie Wood's physical dimensions and her measured blood alcohol content of 0.42%, combined with the motion sickness medication and painkillers also found in her system, are documented facts. A 3D physics simulation using all of those parameters can calculate what a fall from that specific position, under those specific conditions, on that specific night would actually have looked like, what trajectory it would have produced, what impact pattern it would have created. And that simulated outcome can then be compared directly against the physical evidence that was actually recorded. If the simulation says a fall from that position under those conditions should produce bruises in locations A, B, and C, and the coroner's report shows bruises in locations A, B, and X, that mismatch is information. It does not prove anything on its own. But it forces a question that 1981's tools could not force, because 1981 had no simulation to compare against. It was simply a human examiner looking at bruises and making a judgment call. Today, that judgment call can be tested against physics, and the results of that test can be presented as objective data. The third critical technology is AI-driven timeline reconstruction and witness testimony analysis. In the summer of 2024, the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department brought in AI researchers to review a 20-year-old unsolved murder. The team used an AI tool to create a coherent timeline of events by analyzing 3,000 pages of investigative material, including handwritten notes, a task that would have taken months manually. In the United Kingdom, police departments are testing AI tools to analyze evidence in cold cases, with the software capable of sifting through video footage, financial transactions, social media records, emails, and documents simultaneously, with authorities claiming the tool was able to review evidentiary material from 27 cases in just 30 hours. In the Wood case, this technology is directly applicable to one of the most damning and least explained elements of that night: the timeline of when the alarm was raised. Natalie Wood went into the water at some point in the hours after midnight. Witnesses on nearby boats would later tell investigators they heard a woman screaming across the water, calling for help, somewhere around midnight. If that timing is accurate, then she was in the water, alive and calling for help, while the people on board the Splendour were not yet contacting anyone. What Wagner still refuses to explain is why he waited more than 4 hours to call for help, despite knowing that Natalie, who had a lifelong fear of dark water, was missing. By the time the Coast Guard was notified at 3:30 in the morning, it was far too late. Cold water physiology is unforgiving. The Pacific Ocean off Catalina in late November is cold enough to cause severe hypothermia within a short window. Every minute in that water reduced the chance of survival significantly. Every hour was a near-certain death sentence for someone who could not swim and who was intoxicated. The delay between when Wood likely entered the water and when the Coast Guard was called is not a minor procedural footnote in this case. It is potentially the difference between a woman being rescued and a woman being recovered as a body the following morning. An AI timeline analysis tool applied to this case would do something no human investigator could do as efficiently. It would take every piece of testimony from every witness who provided a statement across multiple decades of investigation and map the claim timelines against each other, flagging every inconsistency, every moment where one account says something was happening and another account says something different was happening at the same time. It would cross-reference those testimonies with the objective physical facts that cannot be adjusted: the time the Coast Guard received the distress call, the time the body was found, the meteorological conditions, the water temperature, and it would produce a visualization of where the testimony-based timeline and the physical evidence timeline align and where they diverge. That divergence is where the truth lives, and making it visible with precision is exactly what modern AI tools are built to do. In California, in late 2025, a platform called Closure began contracting with law enforcement agencies to work on cold case murders going back to the 1980s. The platform can quickly identify every witness, suspect, and associated person who has ever been linked to a specific case and search for connections between any of those individuals and the crime in ways that would have been hard to see before, particularly in cases where evidence exists in forms ranging from typed police reports to scratched handwritten notes recorded in various formats across decades. That is almost exactly a description of what the Natalie Wood investigative record looks like. Decades of accumulated testimonies, original police notes, the captain's later revised account, new witnesses who came forward in 2011 and 2012, the official investigation, the reinvestigation, all of it existing in different formats, different decades, different levels of reliability. Feeding that entire record into a tool designed to find patterns and inconsistencies across large, messy, multi-decade data sets is not a hypothetical application. It is precisely what the technology is designed for. The fourth element is audio analysis. This one may be the most haunting aspect of the entire case, and the one where modern technology creates the most striking contrast with what was possible in 1981. Multiple witnesses on boats moored near the Splendour that night told investigators they heard a woman screaming across the water, screaming for help. The accounts were consistent in their description of the nature of the sounds: a woman in distress, calling out into the dark. In 1981, those accounts were witness testimony. They were human memories of sounds heard across water at night, imprecise, emotional, subject to the normal limitations of memory and perception. As evidence, they were powerful, but not quantifiable. Modern audio forensic analysis tools use AI to do things that no human investigator could do with acoustic witness accounts in 1981. They can analyze acoustic environments, modeling how sound travels across water at specific temperatures and wind speeds, calculating what a human voice would sound like at different distances from a specific point under those exact conditions. They can use that modeling to estimate from which direction and at what distance a sound would have had to originate to be heard with the characteristics multiple witnesses described. They can compare those acoustic estimates against the physical geography of the scene, the positions of the boats, the location where Wood's body was found, and the layout of the Splendour, to produce an evidence-based reconstruction of where those screams likely came from and roughly when. That acoustic reconstruction would either be consistent with Wood being in the water at midnight calling for help, or it would not. And that answer matters enormously to the timeline question. The fifth technology is something that connects all of these individual tools into a coherent picture. It is what researchers call multimodal AI integration, the capacity to take every type of evidence simultaneously: physical, acoustic, testimonial, photographic, meteorological, and run them all through a unified analysis that looks for the single coherent account of events that best fits all of them at once. Research on AI-driven forensic investigation describes a layered framework that integrates NLP for processing case reports, computer vision for extracting evidence, machine learning and knowledge, graph analysis for correlating clues, and blockchain for securing evidence, creating an intelligent closed loop that in documented applications has increased cold case clearance rates by 25%. That integrated approach is not about finding the most dramatic interpretation of the evidence. It is about finding the interpretation that is most consistent with all of the evidence simultaneously, including the evidence that supports accident scenarios, as well as the evidence that does not. And that methodological neutrality is actually what makes it more trustworthy than the human investigations that preceded it. Because human investigators, even excellent ones, are subject to cognitive biases that AI systems are designed to minimize. In 1981, the investigation was framed as an accident from very early on. Once a frame is established, human beings tend to interpret subsequent evidence in ways that fit the frame and discount evidence that does not. An AI system does not have a frame. It has constraints. Find the account that satisfies all of the data. And if the account that satisfies all of the data does not match the one the world was told in 1981, that is not the algorithm's opinion. That is what the evidence says. None of this means that Robert Wagner murdered Natalie Wood. That has not been established and cannot be established by technology alone. What it means is that the question of how she ended up in the water that night remains genuinely open, that the evidence in this case is more complex and less consistent with a simple accident than the 1981 investigation recognized, and that the tools now exist to analyze that evidence in ways that were not previously possible. The death certificate does not say accident. The investigators who re-examined the case over 6 years do not say accident. The witnesses who heard screams across the water do not support an unnoticed slip in the dark. The bruises on her body do not straightforwardly say fall. The delay between when she likely entered the water and when help was called does not support a picture of a husband who simply did not know his wife was gone. What modern forensic technology does is take all of those uncomfortable facts and give them a framework for being analyzed with precision and objectivity. It replaces the 1981 coroner's judgment call with a physics simulation. It replaces 2 weeks of human investigation with months of equivalent analytical depth delivered in hours. It replaces acoustic memory with modeled sound propagation. It replaces the human tendency to fit evidence to a frame with an algorithm that has no preference for any particular answer and simply follows the data to wherever it leads. The Natalie Wood case is not unique in this regard. In 2025, Kerala police in India solved a brutal triple murder case that had remained unsolved for 19 years by using AI technology to progressively age-old photographs of suspects and compare the AI-generated images against social media photographs, achieving a 90% match that led investigators to 2 men who had been living under false identities for nearly 2 decades. The cases are different in nature, but the principle is the same. Evidence that could not be fully analyzed with the tools available at the time of the original investigation can be revisited with tools that did not yet exist, and those tools can find what the original investigation missed. The difference in the Wood case is that the evidence being revisited is not photographic. It is physical. It is testimonial. It is acoustic. And it is the record of a timeline that multiple investigators have looked at over multiple decades and consistently found troubling. The technology does not change what happened that night. Nothing can change what happened that night. But it can change what we are able to say with confidence about what happened, and it can change what a modern court would be presented with if the case ever reached that point. As of today, it has not reached that point. Wagner has refused to speak with investigators since the case was reopened, and Lieutenant Catalina has said he does not believe the actor has told the full story about what happened. No charges have been filed. The case remains open as a suspicious circumstances death. The death certificate still says drowning and other undetermined factors, and the undetermined has never been resolved. What the application of modern forensic technology to this case represents is not a guarantee of resolution. Cold cases are not solved by technology alone. They are solved by evidence, by testimony, by the decisions of prosecutors, and ultimately by courts. Technology can clarify the evidence. It can make inconsistencies visible with precision that human analysis cannot match. It can take the judgment calls that were made in 1981 under time pressure with limited tools and replace them with data-driven analysis that is testable, reproducible, and documentable. But what it finds still has to be acted on by human beings. The woman it concerns was genuinely extraordinary. She spent her life being managed, controlled, shaped by forces that saw her first as a product and only second as a person. She fought her way through that to build a career that was real and substantial and her own. She had a fear she carried all her life, a deep, unreasoning dread of dark water, and she died in exactly the circumstance she most dreaded. The world was given a story of an accident and told to grieve and move on. Some people accepted that story. Some people, including the investigators who spent years re-examining the evidence, never fully did. The tools that exist now could not bring her back in 1981, and they cannot bring her back today. But they can do something the 1981 investigation could not do. They can look at every piece of evidence simultaneously, without bias, without the pressure of a 2-week deadline, without the frame of accident already established before the analysis was complete, and ask a single question. What account of events on the night of November 28, 1981, is most consistent with everything the evidence actually shows? That question deserves an answer. 43 years have passed, and it still does not have one. The technology to pursue it more rigorously than ever before now exists. Whether anyone with the authority to use it decides to do so is a different question entirely. But the gap between what happened and what the world was told remains open, and modern forensic science, for the first time, has the tools to look into that gap with the kind of precision and objectivity that the original investigation simply could not provide.